1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret never to be told. According to an old superstition, the number of magpies seen tells if one will have bad luck or good luck. We're ending on 6 for gold. Did you get the gold prize of solving the mysteries? Or are you still stuck on 7 and shocked of the secret never to be told? Let's solve Magpie Murders, Season 1, Episode 6. We broke down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on the hunt to learn who killed Alan Conway, if he was killed. Of course he was killed. The title is Magpie Murders. Spoilers, if you haven't seen all 6 episodes of Magpie Murders, stop this video, take an award-winning prize, smash yourself in the head with it, and leave while you can. We're going to be reviewing everything, all the mysteries that went down. If you enjoyed this series, don't hesitate to read Anthony Horowitz's novel, Magpie Murders, which this miniseries is based on, or you could just jump to the second book in the series, Moonflower Murders. It turns out one of Alan Conway's earlier books, Atticus Pund Takes the Case, could have been based on a real-life murder, and Susan has to investigate that. A not-so-humble brag is that in that book, I think it's almost as good as Magpie Murders, but I just happened to solve both the Atticus Pund mystery and the Susan Ryland mystery. But it's real fun. If you like this, check out that book. Author Anthony Horowitz has hinted that we could see that turned into another miniseries, but we'd be looking at 2024, the earliest for when that would be released. Listeners, all season long, I've mentioned that I read the book. And when I read the book, I immediately solved the Alan Conway part of the mystery. Why? Really because I'd read all those Agatha Christie books when I was a kid. Never take anything based off one person's word. And almost immediately in the book, Susan mentions that she received this manuscript from Charles. I was like, okay, Charles owns this company. Alan Conway, we were constantly told, is how Charles made all this money, how they're successful enough to be sold. And I started thinking, you're telling me he didn't read it? He had it at least a full day before Susan got back from Germany. He wasn't worried when he saw Atticus Pund have cancer and a tumor. He didn't flip to the end to see if Atticus Pund, his money-making character, died. It didn't make sense. So the whole time when I read the novel, I was looking at Charles. I've also been very upfront. When I read this book, I did not in any way solve the Magpie Murders manuscript. Watching the show, this is very much an Agatha Christie mystery too. For those of you who know certain Agatha Christie mysteries, you'll know that even some of the clues are taken directly from them. Spoiler alert, don't think about Magpie Murders when you're watching the upcoming 3rd Kenneth Branagh version of Hercule Poirot. You'll maybe solve it a bit too quick. Why didn't I solve the Magpie Murders manuscript in the book? Because there's so much more. The author of this book, who also wrote these 6 episodes, Anthony Horowitz, said that he had to remove some characters and some of the facts from the Magpie Murders manuscript. That's exactly true. Believe it or not, I'm pretty sure I suspected the vicar or the vicar's wife, and I really fell for all the Dingle-Dell ridiculousness. Even though if there's this flashback to the tragedy at the lake, you should know as a mystery reader, hey, this has to do with the tragedy of the lake. Right now, let's review how I believe you could have solved the tragedy at the lake and the Magpie Murders mystery if you had just watched the show. I've been talking for a couple of podcasts about how the show in Atticus Pund made a point of put everything in order, and how Mary Blakiston had a lot of contradictory things said about her. Specifically, she worshipped Sir Magnus. Sir Magnus would never have a romantic relationship with her. Are you kidding? Those type of contradictions come up all the time in Agatha Christie mysteries. When you notice those type of contradictions in an Agatha Christie novel, your little gray cells really need to be going. They need to be dinging, 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 because that's something you need to focus on and solve. So let's see if just by watching the show you could solve it. So we knew that Mary Blakiston and her husband Matthew were married and had 2 kids. Robert and Sam. We know that during the war, Matthew, her husband, went off to the RAF. She got asked by Sir Magnus to be a housekeeper at his place. She and the boys moved in. The boys had a lot of fun. And then Sam died. Sam died while playing a game created by Sir Magnus. Yet, everybody said Mary worshipped Sir Magnus. Her youngest son died playing a game created by Sir Magnus, yet everybody said she worshipped him. a detective would suddenly think, well, hold on. Either she doesn't hold Sir Magnus responsible in any way, or she didn't like Sam and she's glad the kid is dead, right? Those are the only two reasons why she wouldn't in some way emotionally take this out on Sir Magnus. We see, admittedly not until the 5th episode, that Sam's room was left as it was. It was left as a child's room, almost a memorial to him. So that tells us, okay, Mary was not happy that Sam died. Mary mourned for her son Sam. So let's go back to the other point. She didn't blame Sir Magnus. Well, why wouldn't she have blamed Sir Magnus? Well, as Catfish, our internet detective, said very wisely last week, Mary's room had a view of the lake. So she probably saw what happened. And so therefore, she can't blame Sir Magnus. Why can't she blame Sir Magnus? She saw that it had nothing to do with him. Then you have to go to the next thing. Well, if she saw it and she knows it has nothing to do with him, maybe she knows what happened. And why would you think she knows what happened? Well, who was there? Obviously, Brent the gardener was there. Now, Mary never spoke to him, never talked to him. But if Mary thought Brent the gardener was responsible for her son Sam's death, and once again she kept a memorial to Sam in her house, she would have thrown him to the cops, right? So, okay, Mary never blamed Sir Magnus, and she never blamed Brent. Those things, once again, just based on the facts, you don't have to, go and create facts like, oh, maybe Sam is Sir Magnus's son. Just going on that, you're like, okay, this must be how it is. So once again, she didn't blame Brent or Sir Magnus. The only other character we know who was there was, of course, who? Robert. There was never any talk that Robert killed Sam. Fine, okay, fair enough. But what do we know? After that, she kept a close eye on Robert. She hovered over him like a hawk. So you think, okay, well, she lost a son, and this is what the book wants you to think. This is what the show wants you to think. She lost one son. She's going to watch closely over this son. All right, you understand. That's fine. Makes perfect sense. Yet in the diary page, which we showed last week, and in the 2 scenes we saw her actually alive, where Robert was in the scene as well, she wasn't nice to him at all. She wasn't treating him like, oh, this is my last remaining son. I love you. In the one scene in town, she called Robert the biggest disappointment of her life. Okay, suddenly you can start piecing these things together. All right, she lost a son. She doesn't blame the 2 of the people who were there, Brent and Sir Magnus. One of the persons who's there, she treats pretty poorly, and in one scene called him the biggest disappointment of her life. Your next bit of deducting, admittedly, is where it gets difficult. Robert, his mom in some ways thinks he's responsible for Sam's death. It may not be murder, but she thinks something's wrong with Robert and holds him responsible. Yet Robert had an airtight alibi in Mary's death. And then Robert's reason to kill Sir Magnus still doesn't come through too much. This is once again where you want to put things in order. In episode 5, the vicar tells us that Robert was at the funeral. He left right after the funeral. Okay? Why is that important? Well, if you go chronologically through what you know happened, the next thing that we know chronologically in the timeline that happened is Sir Magnus Pye's house was broken into. Then all that stuff ends up in the lake, kind of like that game that Sir Magnus played where, hey, find these coins, find these stuff. Where is it? Oh, Sam thought it was in the lake. So your mind should definitely think, well, Robert probably stole this stuff. He left right after the funeral. It was after the funeral when the place was robbed. Now, admittedly, any time after the funeral, any of the people at the funeral could have gone to Pye Hall and stolen the stuff. But just logically, you don't know anything about anybody else after the funeral. The one thing you know about Robert is he left right after the service. He was gone. He didn't hang around to talk to people. Robert stole the stuff and then dumped it in the lake. Still, how do you then go to Robert killed Sir Magnus? And this, I think, is tricky in the book. I think it's tricky in the show. You have to then go, okay, well, Sir Magnus met with somebody. This person killed Sir Magnus and then burnt something. Remember, the sheet of paper had Sir Magnus's blood on it. Atticus tells us pretty early, possibly in episode 4, that the killer, that was their point. They wanted to find this paper and they wanted to burn it. This is where I don't think a great detective can easily go, okay, Mary wrote down a bunch of secrets in a diary. What if she wrote down stuff from 12 years before when Sam died and then gave it to Sir Magnus? That's where there really aren't enough clues to get you all the way there. But I see from the comments on YouTube that a lot of people did suspect Robert. Admittedly, because it's so hard to get from Mary wrote a lot of secrets down to your brain having to do the mental jump of, oh, she wrote down a secret, gave it to Sir Magnus, and said, if I die under suspicious circumstances, open and read this. That is too tough a hill to jump. So if you guessed Robert based on the things we knew, I think you deserve credit. What do you think? We've had so much fun this whole season talking through this murder mystery. We're going to bring on our internet detective Catfish in a bit to give you his final thoughts. But know that we want you on this. If you haven't seen Only Murders in the Building, know that we have covered and done Let's Solve Only Murders in the Building for Season 1 and Season 2. The murder mystery part of it is, well, the clues aren't really as important in that show as they are in this, but I still think you'll love it. It's highly entertaining. We are about to begin covering a different type of mystery show, a what the blank is going on type show in Netflix's 1899. This show is crazy. We're going to have a podcast out for it real soon. We want you on all our future journeys, so please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on social media. We're Double P Media, which is at Double PHQ. The word double, the single letter P for podcast, HQ for headquarters, at Double PHQ on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/Double PHQ. We've got a website, doublepmedia.com. You can email us, hello@doublepmedia.com. Or if you're on YouTube, just get down in the comments, subscribe, and follow all the great stuff we have coming up. Are you satisfied with this mystery? Do you think it's too tricky? Did you solve the Alan Conway stuff like I did? Please write to us and let us know. Let's now bring on Catfish to see what he thinks of all these twists. Catfish, let's bring you in and let's see how our listeners did. We put up a poll on our YouTube page asking them, and this was after episode 4. We said, hey, there are 2 more episodes of Magpie Murders left. How do you think Alan Conway died? The number 1 option at only 44% was murder. The next option was 22% accident. 19%, only 19% said suicide. And then I threw a curveball in there and said, well, maybe he faked his death, and we got 15% of the people to vote for that. Any thoughts on our listeners' responses to this poll, Catfish?
I mean, it makes me feel less bad, unless they were joking, this was joke responses. It makes me feel less bad for how poorly I did at this. That some people would fall for faked his own death.
Well, we had never pitched it, and I thought I was coming up with options for the poll, and I was like, well, I suppose he could have, but okay.
I'm just saying, it makes me feel better.
Well, another thing that's going to make you feel better, Catfish, is there's a section we're going to get to called Correct Catfish.
Yes.
Catfish has been watching these episodes, and I always say at the end of these episodes, when we talk to Catfish, he says so many things that are correct. Listeners, you know that very early on, maybe the second episode, Catfish was saying there is going to be an anagram in this that's going to play a part. And he picked up on it. I really do think it was the second episode where they mentioned, Alan's computer, you log in via an anagram of Atticus Pund. Catfish, you caught that real quick. How did you catch it so quick? What about that little scene made it stand out so much?
It just did stick out to me because at that point you knew that he was the kind of person that thought he was smarter than everyone else. And so I think an anagram is a good way to feel superior, to create an anagram and that other people can't get.
Now, I also, every podcast, I'd say, boy, Catfish, you say something that is so correct. And you're like, this is true. And then, of course, you go seemingly the opposite way. Catfish, I think this was another one. You hit real early, and you kept saying it. And I kept wanting to say, yes, and the classic improv tool that I would never use. But Catfish, you said in almost every podcast, the killer has to be someone who read the book. And, of course, it's like, Catfish, who read the book? That's exactly right. You were 100% right. But the show tricked you. Catfish, you said it almost every podcast. You were 100% correct, but the show tricked you. And while you did look at Charles a bit, you didn't really turn your attention to him. So what do you think happened there? Because you were 100% right. You figured that out immediately. You knew that had to be true.
Even though I was right about both of those things, it didn't matter at all to me solving it. And let me get to those, but let's go through. People love their text all the time. They're contacting me and they say, we love your little bits. So let's go through our regular bits. The triple M. That's the amusing Magpie moment. In this episode, Bubba, you would think there wasn't anything funny in this episode. You would be completely wrong because Charles, calm under pressure.
Go on.
He clubs her and then just sets fire to the office. I mean, how did this guy survive in the business world? He just falls apart immediately.
That was a message from the board, the national board. Don't drink, kids.
I'm also serving and this is my last night of serving my AA Atticus apprenticeship. But you know what, Bubba? Unlike Susan, I didn't need Atticus to tell me not to accuse someone of murder, then turn my back on them.
Well, she just wanted to go home. She's like, you obviously I'm laying out all the facts. You're a killer. Okay, talk to you later. Have fun at the police station.
I'm destroying your life completely. I'm the only one who knows. Goodbye.
Peace out.
Atticus did give me 2 more pieces of advice. He told me not to be too hard on myself. The killer has been apprehended. Now, he had a statement in between that when he was saying to Susan that you solved the murder, but I'm going to ignore that part of it because I did, well, though. And then he said we have separate paths to follow. That is true. Atticus solving murders into eternity, me not solving any murders ever in the past or in the future. Now I'm going to talk about some red herrings that we had throughout this. Every week I decided that there was red herrings. I called them out. Some I was right about, some I wasn't. However, the biggest red herring is that I always assumed that Alan died because he was a Turns out that's not why he died. That had nothing to do with his death, really.
You could, if you were not as terrible as Alan was, you could have had this hidden anagram of Atticus Pund in your novels. You could have demanded it, Magpie Murders and not be the Magpie Murders, but still not be so demeaning to your audience, and to the guy who made you all this money and they explain he was sick of his money, sick of fame and all this stuff. But it wasn't good enough that he had, snookered everybody. He wanted everybody to know they had been snookered, right? And so that is being kind of a jerk, which did lead to his eventual death.
Yeah, but I thought it was because he was personally rude to someone. You're right. In every podcast, and this is related to why I thought Alan was killed, I would say the killer had to be someone who read the book, because I thought it was he made fun of somebody in the book and they personally got so upset. I also thought that the parallels between what happened in the book and happened in real life were intentional when they completely weren't. And that was a red herring. We even had another parallel tonight with the burning of papers. So that was a red herring because I had nothing to do with it. So I knew about the anagrams, even if and Bubba, you can vouch for this. I woke up the other morning, shot, called you early in the morning. I said, is this what it is? The anagram. And you're like, yes, you got it right. Still, even if I had figured that out, I still would not have gone the whole length and figured anything out. So the anagrams wouldn't have helped me even if I'd figured it out earlier. And the books, even then, that wouldn't have helped me. That wouldn't have given me more of a clue that an anagram meant something. This anagram wouldn't have helped me. So what did I get right? I did accuse Charles, but that's because I accused everybody. I did say
that's a smart theory.
I did say who took that picture, but I didn't say whoever took that picture was the murderer, even though I was thinking it. I got Magnus's pie murderer right. It's Robert Blakiston. And I got it right that he got upset by what the priest said, what he left behind. Okay. What I got wrong is it was a complete guess on my part that Robert Blakiston killed Pye. So I got the person right. But the reason, I don't know. I feel like I could have figured out who killed Alan if I was paying more attention. But weirdly, I don't think I could have figured out who killed Magnus Pi, even though I did figure out who killed Magnus Pi.
Listeners, forget Catfish. If you didn't solve this, I'm willing to bet that a lot of the times your ears would kind of prick on something and you'd think about something, just like Catfish with those anagrams. But also Catfish kept focusing on what? Mary Blakiston's relationship to Sir Magnus Pi. That is the thing that tickles it. And so even if Catfish, or maybe you, didn't resolve this mystery, I do believe that you would constantly focus on that. Wait a minute, what is going on? We were hearing contradictory things. Many people would say, oh, Mary Blakiston worshipped Sir Magnus. She treated him like the lord of the land. Mary was so deferential to him, really did think so much of him. And yet you had two people, specifically Magnus Pi's wife, Frances, and you also had the gardener, Brent, who were always quick to point out that it wasn't romantic. And so that unique thing, the reason why it stuck out in your brain and the why you bring it up and the why your brain wants to make connections is because you could tell, wait a minute, there's something here that I need to solve. Whether it's, hey, maybe Sir Magnus is the father of Mary's children or whatever. The idea that you focus on that shows that you are connecting with it. You are seeing that this is something that I need to solve, even if it isn't a murder mystery, because it's how do I put this contradictory information into, have it make sense. And so I think you did that great. I saw so many of our listeners who wrote comments and they'd be trying to make that make sense. And I'd be thinking to myself, that is exactly right. So even if you didn't solve this mystery, and I love saying that I didn't solve the Robert Blakiston part of this at all when I read the novel, but if you make those connections, you are a detective. You may not have gotten the final solution, but by piecing that together, hey, tip of my cap to you. Let's go drink down at 23 Baker Street.
Are we going to drink or are we going to have some cocaine?
Whatever Sherlock would do. I do want to quickly get to some of the great feedback we've gotten all podcast long. First off,
Love it.
Catfish, what did Lucas say?
Lucas says, I now hereby confess I just read and finished the entire novel, and now I'm sad it's over.
No.
Also, I will not spoil it just now, so I will say I will probably gloat a success or cry a failure, and I'll be happy because I'm glad I got to share this wacky adventure with you guys. And sad it's almost over. They aren't releasing good murder mysteries anymore, even in miniseries like Magpie Murders or Only Murders in the Building. And it'll be a while before Only Murders in the Building Season 3 drops, or even the adaptation of Moonflower Murders, the sequel. I just want to say, Bubba, Catfish, if either of you reading this, thank you for taking on us an adventure of enjoyment. Well, thank you, Luca, for joining us on this adventure of, for me, befuddlement.
Hey, we got this great feedback from Jink. Did Charles know about the road work on the way to the funeral? Jinko, you catch the clue. Even the one that I didn't say because I thought pointing it out would be too much of a red spotlight on this clue. The camera moved past the car right after the turn and zooms on the roadwork. If Charles isn't the murderer, there's at least something suspicious about him. Wonderful job, Jinko.
Love it. And Maryam says, Mary Blakiston's lodge house with the lake view is supposed to be dumpy, but would be worth millions now. Thanks for these recaps. I love the show and plan to read the book after. I'm weird like that.
Oh, thank you so much. Here is another fun bit of feedback from Honey 604 Sunshine. Suddenly I had a flash. Charles is the name of Lady Frances Pi's London lover. Very good. Charles Clover could be his modern equivalent. Two Charleses. We don't know much about Charles Clover, do we? Love it.
Wow, that is awesome. Cherie Scott had a lot of feedback and said it included, I do not trust Charles, Susan's boss, because he told Susan he had not been to Suffolk in about 5 months. But when he and Susan were driving to Alan's funeral, Alan told Susan to go another way because of roadworks. How would he know that if he hadn't been in Suffolk lately? Sounds like he's been to Abbey Grange recently. That is great. Sherry, amazing. Sherry, so good. And you know what? And this is why I say, and I'm glad that you said that. This is why I say I feel like I should have been able to put Alan's together. As far as Mary Blakiston and Magnus Pie, I'm glad you didn't solve it in the old novel, Bubba, because I really do feel like it's really hard. There's so much that's hidden as opposed to what's shown in the modern day.
All right, Jonathan Green wrote, I'm not sure who killed Magnus Pie, but I suspect that someone may have blamed him for the other 2 deaths at Pie Hall. Ooh, Jonathan, you missed on this one, but I do love it. And then we had this final bit of feedback, which is way off. Let's be honest, this is way off from what ended up being true. But we love that you guys are coming up with these theories, coming up with these fun things. So Catfish, why don't you begin to read wonderful feedback we got from Glasswing Butterfly?
All right, I love it. Here we go. And I hope our listeners can follow this. You know, Bubba, after about episode 2, I think you're in episode 2, I read a long explanation of someone who had a theory. And I said, whoa, I'm completely confused. But when I listened to the podcast, I was like, that was a great theory. So maybe this is going to be great too, even though we know the end. After episode 4, I was playing around with anagrams from the show, then decided to just check the meaning of Atticus and Pund. Oh, I love this. Atticus means someone from Athens, Greece. Atticus had Greek and ancient Roman roots derived from Latin. The first known person named Atticus was Titus Pomponius, a supporter of Athenian culture and friend of Cicero, of suspicious. Since Susan's boyfriend Andreas is Greek, I think there's a connection between him and Atticus Pund. Pund means is a variant of pound, like money. The Urban Dictionary equates Pund to a kind of pompous know-it-all who really knows nothing, a failed pundit. Sounds like what Alan might call his colleague professor from university, Andreas. Oh my God!
That
anyway,
great? That is great.
I love this online Let's Solve Magpie Murders series. You are fantastic as the host, explaining just enough without revealing too much each time. Also, the guest is great. Love his energy and insights, or lack thereof at times, making us all feel better about our own mistakes. Thank you. What a complex book miniseries with so many potential suspects for so many different crimes and 2 different time periods. So clever to use the same actor for each set of modern-day person character in the book. Truly a unique whodunit. I love it.
Well, we love you. We love everybody who's been kind enough to be on this journey with us to find out who killed Alan Conway, if he was killed, which of course he was. It's called Magpie Murders. Let's get with the program, people. If you're somehow new to Catfish and I here at Double P Podcast, we do a lot of after show podcasts. We do some Let's Solve podcasts. We talk about a lot of fun shows. We are wrapping up a show that I know, Catfish, you love, Andor. Why should people, if they haven't started Andor, start watching the show and join us on our Parsec Passion podcast?
First of all, Andor is an amazing show set in the Star Wars universe without relying on too much of the Star Wars universe or, cutesy aliens or robots. It's strikingly different, although it's recognizably Star Wars, and it is excellently written, excellently produced, excellently acted, and it's a serious, good show. And then they should listen to us because sometimes we talk about serious things, but also we have a little fun with it.
Certainly. You can please subscribe on however you're listening to this podcast. If it's on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcast or Spotify, Google Podcast, Audible, whatever it is, please subscribe and follow us on this fun journey. For everybody here, my name's Bubba. You can find me on Twitter at FitandTrim. That's FITTENTRIM, at FitandTrim on Twitter.
And I am Catfish, CJGman67 on Twitter. I may not be smart enough to solve a murder, but I know not to turn my back on a murderer.
And you'll hear us next time. Well, no, you won't, because there's not any more of these. We've solved Magpie Murders.
We did it.